But in the arguments against for Trump are simplistic. They're easily factually dismissible, and they're just talking points, as I mentioned, from the Trump campaign and Fox Entertainment. Listen, Anton Daniels, again, caveat is I respect him on a lot of different things. He was on a video talking to, yes, our good friend Laura Ingraham on Fox News, talking about he was with a bunch of African Americans who were saying things like, well, you need to, why are you voting for Kamala Harris? And somebody on there who's just as ill-informed on the left said, I'm voting for her because she's black. And then, of course, Anton Daniels rained down on her. But Poor Man's Podcast put out that particular studio deal, and he put forward the appearance that he made on the Laura Ingraham show. And what's interesting to me was that he just repeated the same simplistic points that, like Donald Trump points out, that nobody ever challenges. So let me talk about a couple of them. One, black people on the Democratic plantation, and what do they have to show for it? Every black city is a hellhole. That's exactly what he said. Let me always say this. Look, can the Democrats do more in cities? Absolutely. Have they done everything that they promised to do in most of these major cities and most of these major urban towns for African Americans, for Latinos, for a whole city trouble? No, they have not. I'm one of those former elected officials at the city level. Municipal council person, did a lot of good stuff. No, I didn't solve poverty. But here's the problem. And here's the problem with that kind of thinking. Do you recognize that the Republicans, let's turn this argument on its head. Republicans have been in charge of southern states, not cities, southern states for I don't know how long. And they are those states are not just cities or towns, those are entire states. And Republican working class people have been voting Republican for decades, more decades than African Americans have even been voting for Democrats. And what have they gotten out of the deal for voting Republicans? I'm talking about states like Mississippi, states like Alabama, states like Tennessee. White rural Southerners been voting Republicans for years, and what have they gotten out of it? I'll tell you what they've gotten out of it. Poor infrastructure. There are roads that haven't been paved in decades in the South. Poor health care. Have you seen the dental work and teeth of some of the poorest residents in those particular communities? Lack of jobs, lack of job training, no unions, so you don't get paid a decent salary. You have schools that are failing. Those states are always in the bottom half of American schools. What else is crazy about them? They have, again, no child care, terrible standards of living, and an opioid crisis that is going right through the roof. Some of those people who talk about, well, I would never do San Francisco, you'd be glad to be in a tenement in some of the worst cities, worst performing cities in America than live where these guys live. So, yeah, take that into consideration when we talk about the black plantation, because if black people on the Democratic plantation, that means we're just picking cotton. But the rural white Southerner who's on the Republican plantation, yeah, he's picking sugar cane. We're just picking different products. The problem is that you should be calling out the system and calling out both parties. I have more respect for you, but being, again, the bootlicking supplicant for the Republican Party, it's just ridiculous. Another thing I always say, the economy was great under Donald Trump. That's a bunch of horse manure. Yeah, the economy was great pre-COVID, right? But at the end of Donald Trump's term, 6.3% unemployment rate. He lost 4 million jobs. Now, you say, well, you said that was post-COVID. It was due to COVID. Really? Well, how come you can understand that? Now, I'm somebody that doesn't necessarily blame Donald Trump for the 6.3% unemployment rate because of COVID. I don't necessarily blame Donald Trump for the 4 million jobs he lost due to COVID, because I also recognize that the reason why we have inflation today in America, and yes, in every industrialized nation in the world, is because of post-COVID. Yes, the whole world coming out of post-COVID, every major nation has severe inflation, and America has probably the lowest inflation rates of any of those major industrialized nations, lower than Paris. Actually, friends who went to the Olympics in Paris, how much prices were like there compared to America or England or Japan or even China and Russia for that matter. So I'm not excusing it, but I'm saying it's amazing to me how people can blame Joe Biden and Kamala Harris for inflation being sky high when we all know and economists say it's because of post-COVID, but we want to leave Trump untouched, unblamed, unblemished for him presiding over a 6.3% unemployment rate and losing 4 million jobs pre-COVID because of COVID. You guys ain't adding up what's right. They say that, we're in 3 proxy wars and there were no wars under Donald Trump. That's a lie. When Donald Trump, this is a simple chat GBT Google. You can Google it yourself. What wars were we in by proxy? Not directly in, but by proxy. Here's a list under Donald Trump. Afghanistan, Iraq and Syria, Operation Inherent Resolve, Somalia, West Africa, Yemen, the counterterrorism of operations and the counterintelligence global operations. That was in Libya, the Philippines, and Pakistan. That's over 8. That's more than being in 3 proxy wars. America's always in proxy wars. We're the police of the world. And so we're always doing this. No president of modern age has never not had a war that we were not in, or that we were not funding, or that we were on the proxy for, or on the sidelines supporting. And that includes Donald Trump. They see no hypocrisy being in agreement with what they say are the worst in our people, which is interesting to me too. So, for instance, these same people who are on the air, who are on social media, on YouTube, love to talk about rappers, love to talk about, how low rent they are, how they're the worst example for our people. And yet, they seem to find agreement on who should be our president. So Anton Daniels, for instance, who thinks rappers are this and low right, well, you agree with Lil Pump. You agree with Sexy Red, Poor Man's Podcast. All right, you agree with all these little, you agree with Waka Flocka, right? You agree with all these folks who are one-hit wonders, nobody cares about, don't have any kind of sense of knowledge, that you think are wrong on just about every other issue, right? But this one. And don't hand me with, because that Poor Man's Podcast said the same thing. Well, Kamala Harris had Megan Thee Stallion dancing at a rally for her, and it was lewd and it was disgusting. Yeah, and the Republicans at Amber Rose, the inventor of the slut walk, not dancing, speaking during prime time at the Republican National Convention. But we don't mention that, right? Thankfully, though, they have no influence, and I mean no influence over the masses of black people, because they have a job to do, right? Whoever's paying them on the right, their job is to pull 8% of black women away from the Democratic vote and 15 to 18% of black men. But you know what's happened since Kamala Harris has become the nominee, which shows, again, how their influence is minimal at best with black people when it comes to politics. Again, I'll give them a shout out for what they do on other platforms and on other subject matters. But in terms of politics, here's what it is. There's been an increase of support for the ticket amongst African Americans. Yes, black voters, Harris has gone from a 23-point lead over Trump to a 54-point lead as of a week ago. Black voters who appear to be considering Trump have moved away from him, dropping 10 points. Good job, folks, because you guys are getting money for free, because you ain't influencing a damn person, and you making all this loot, tearing down a black woman. Good for you. And it shows that you need to stick to your lanes, because nobody's listening to you when it comes to politics, because they see the hypocrisy too. I could go on about some of the things that they've talked about that don't make any doggone sense. 15 to 20 million illegals that are coming to the nation, which is not true. They have no independent analysis of that. That's just what Donald Trump says at rallies. It can go from 10 to 15 to 20 to 30 to 40, depending on how deep South or how deep MAGA the crowd is. He talks about, one of these guys, Anton Daniels, said Chicago deficit is $400 million because of illegal immigration. No one says that. Nobody in Illinois says that. Nobody in Chicago says that. And the fact of the matter is, if the border was such a problem for Republicans and for Donald Trump, then why did Donald Trump stop the bipartisan bill that Senator Langford, Republican from Oklahoma, was working on with Senator Chris Murphy, Democrat from Connecticut, and independent Senator Kirsten Sinema from Arizona, on a bipartisan deal that gave most of the top lines, if you read the legislation, were Republican top lines. Most of the Democrats were like, man, we got to vote for this. This is nothing that we want in there. It was all to make sure that the Republicans are happy with it. And not only did Donald Trump tell the movers of the bill not to move it because it would solve the problem on the border, and it would actually win the election for Joe Biden. He did it for political reasons. So all these people coming across the line, murdering and SAing people and doing all these crazy things in the country. Well, where was the sense of urgency when there was a bipartisan bill? It was so bad that the Republican Party in Oklahoma literally censored Senator Langford for even working with the Democrat on that particular bill. I mean, the hypocrisy. But again, this is what either they don't know or they're willfully being honest, intellectually not honest about talking about. Locked up more black men than ever before. You know, that has been so, Kamala Harris has locked up more black men than ever before, that she has no record. Folks, her record is the police who wear cameras now. The first place they did it was in California. This woman has created all kinds of programs to stop the recidivism of African-American men specifically from going back to prison with job working and all those kind of programs. They called her soft on crime because she was looking out for black men and women and other minorities who were most affected by crime. You know, the same people that said that Obama did nothing for black people. That was another thing that they kind of insinuate. When, if you look at the unemployment rate for black people that Donald Trump loves to crow about, look at the month-to-month breakdown from 2010 to 2016 and see how those numbers came down. 80% of the lowering of black unemployment happened under the Obama administration. Only 20% happened under the Trump administration. Check it for yourself. Don't take my word for it. And yet he crowds about it, says Donald Trump and Barack Obama didn't do anything for you. That's a fact. And they also talk about black people being more conservative than the Democratic Party. Well, David French, who you heard me talk about if you watch my TikTok, who's a staunch conservative, is saying that he is voting for Kamala Harris to save conservatism itself. Now, that came from a strict conservative. And let's be real with you. The black conservatives that you see out here today, that I listed some of them in the past and other content I just made just a few minutes ago, ain't no black people following them. You know who the black person is who's a conservative that black people follow and don't have a problem hearing from? Louis Farrakhan. Check out my video on that on this page right here.